name of God, most merciful, ever merciful. And may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Brothers, sisters, and dear respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam has said, قد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لو كان العقل رجلا لكان الحسن. If intellect were to be personified as a human being, as a man, it would have been Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. The 15th of the holy month of Ramadan marks a very joyous, very happy, auspicious occasion in the Islamic calendar. It was an event that was long awaited by the Holy Prophet ﷺ himself, long awaited by the foremost house in Islam, the house of Fatema and Ali. They were awaiting the event of the birth of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam long before it happened. And it was also an event that was awaited and celebrated by the Muslims in general, even in the time of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, when everyone in the holy city of al-Madinah al-Munawwara noticed the anticipation and the happiness of the Holy Prophet ﷺ as he waited for the arrival of his first grandson, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And when they saw his joy and the joy of his household, we are told, historians tell us that the inhabitants of al-Madinah al-Munawwara, they came out of their houses. They were reciting poetry and chanting, and they decorated the holy city of al-Madinah al-Munawwara when Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was born. And subhanAllah, this is something also to think about, that the event of the birth of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam happens in the middle of the month of faith and spirituality and fasting. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was either born on the second or the third year of the Hijrah, the migration of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And we are told that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed fasting on the Muslims in the second year of Hijrah. So either the same year that he was born or the year after. But in any case, and this is something for us to think about, when we enter into the holy month of Ramadan, we are preparing ourselves that this is going to be a month of spiritual improvement. We're going to be thinking about how we improve ourselves spiritually, how do we get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are obviously acts of worship and rituals that we can do, but there are also events in the holy month that force us to pause and study them and see what can we learn from those events. And even use them, especially those events that touch key figures in Islam. People like Khadija al-Kubra, about whom we spoke earlier during the month of Ramadan, for instance, whose death anniversary happens to be in the month of Ramadan. The same thing we are told, there are reports about the death of the protector and uncle of the Holy Prophet, Abu Talib, alayhi salam. And we also have the martyrdom, the injury and martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam. We have the battle of Badr, and we also have the birth of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. We have to pause at these events. We can't look at them just as historical events. We have to understand the history behind them, but we also have to see what does it mean for us today. What can we learn from these events that we can apply to our daily lives? And one of the things that we have to think about is we are in the middle of the month, of the holy month of Ramadan. And so, as we spoke before the month of Ramadan and when we entered the month of Ramadan, we said that you need to have a plan. You need to have a program when you enter into this month. You have to know that you only have 30 days, and in those 30 days you have to achieve something. You have to improve spiritually. You have to make sure that you're working on things that at the end of the month you can say, I fully benefited from the moments of time that I had in this month, from the days, from the nights. As we said, from the breaths. The Holy Prophet says every breath is counted in the holy month of Ramadan. Make sure that the moments of the month are counted. We are now at the midpoint of the month of Ramadan. It means that we have ended 50% of the month and we only have 50% left. For those who feel like they fully benefited from the first 50%, the first half, great. And you must maintain that discipline and continue working on yourself for another 2 weeks. And those who maybe feel like we've lagged behind, we've been lazy, we haven't been able to fully meet our plans and our expectations, then we still have 2 weeks. And the 2 weeks that we have left are the most important 2 weeks because of the events that they contain, because of Layal al-Qadr that they contain. It is not too late, but we need to focus on that. We only have 2 weeks left. And these events, such as a birth of an Imam, we have to use it like a mirror. You look at yourself through the lens of Imam al-Hasan, through the lens of Khadija, to see to what extent do you align with them, and where do you need to improve? Where are your weaknesses? What are you doing well, and what do you need to work on? So this is a very quick reminder, as we said, something to think about, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this month the month of faith and the month of giving, the month of the birth of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, and this is a topic on its own. One of the things that we often hear about when we talk about Islam in general, when we talk about specifically Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, people always ask, where do I start studying? Where do I start learning? There is so much to learn. And then in addition to this, specifically for Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, if someone wants to study their life and understand who they are, the situation is even more complicated. On the one side, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam lived at perhaps the most sensitive period in Islamic history, the most delicate, the most complicated, and the one that caused the most, let's call it a domino effect. Because of what happened during that time, early Islam, the life of the Holy Prophet, the demise of the Holy Prophet, the first khilafat in Islam, all the way to his own martyrdom. This was an extremely complicated, delicate, sensitive period of history, and it makes it difficult to study it from a historical perspective. That's one. And on the other side, what makes it even more complicated to study the life of Imam Hasan alayhi salam is the work that his enemies have done against him. Without any doubt, there is no other figure in Islam, and no other figure in the school of Ahlul Bayt, no other figure among the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, whose life, whose biography, whose legacy has been as distorted as that of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. It is the biography that is most filled with lies, with defamation, with what they call the character assassination. When you destroy the reputation of someone by damaging, by inventing lies, fabricating stories about them, so that people consider them, belittle them, degrade them, and do not consider them to their full merit. No one in the household of the Holy Prophet, none of the Imams have suffered the type of enmity and fabrications and lies in their life as Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And we're going to talk about some points related to this a little bit later. So because of this, someone may say it's a little bit difficult to study the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. So where do we start? So I thought I would take the little bit of time I have, the few minutes that I have, to try to present something that we can maybe call a map. A quick map for anyone to, if you want to stick to what we're presenting here, at least it gives you a little bit of an overview of who Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was and how to use what we know about him in our daily lives. And if you want to go beyond, and inshallah you will want to go beyond, because we're only spending a few minutes on Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, then these are going to be 4 angles, 4 areas of research that I leave with you, that inshallah you can take seriously and explore any one of them. Knowing what you know with this, inshallah, it gives you a head start and it saves you time, and you know where to focus as you want to study the complicated life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, and how to avoid some of the misconceptions and the pitfalls that surround the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. So the first of these big 4 pillars that we want to talk about has to do with the family ties and the upbringing of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And this is a very important topic in Islam. Who was Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam when we look at him from the angle of his family? What was his relationship with his father? What was his relationship with his mother? What was his relationship with his siblings? What was his relationship with the Holy Prophet? How was he raised? The household of Ali and Fatima is the foremost house in Islam. It is the house that is supposed to be exemplary. It's the house that we are supposed to emulate. It's a house of purity. It's a house of infallibility, of divinely guided people. We have to look at this household and see, how do they go about raising their children? What is the relationship between the husband and wife? What is the relationship between the father and the mother and their children? There are a lot of lessons that we can take by focusing on this angle in the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam specifically. And there is a number of reasons and number of points that we can cover here. The first one, when it comes to the importance of the birth of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. As we have mentioned, and as you guys know, many were insulting the Holy Prophet ﷺ for years, saying that the Holy Prophet does not have any lineage. And the Holy Prophet had said through a hadith, and we also have Surah Al-Kawthar, the Holy Quran, had clearly indicated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give an abundant lineage to the Holy Prophet ﷺ. But it had not happened yet. The abundant lineage had not happened. The Holy Prophet still did not have any children beyond Fatema al-Zahra alayhi salam, until the birth of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. So the birth of Imam al-Hasan marks an additional joy and an additional happiness in the life of the Holy Prophet, in the Islamic outlook, that the prophecy that was foretold that the Holy Prophet would have a descendants, and that descendants would be through Fatema al-Zahra alayhi salam, as he says, on the day of judgment, every person is going to be called by the name of their father, except for my descendants, they will be called through Fatema al-Zahra alayhi salam. And this is, of course, the Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Husayn, through which the descendants of the Holy Prophet ﷺ continued. And the Muslims knew this, and that's why they celebrated, and they were overly joyed with the Holy Prophet and with Imam Ali and with Fatema al-Zahra alayhi salam, that this birth has taken place. This is a fulfillment of a divine promise. That's the first point. A second point related to this is if we look, for instance, at the relationship that Imam Hasan alayhi salam had with his parents. We're told, for instance, that Fatema al-Zahra alayhi salam, at a very young age, she would prepare Imam Hasan alayhi salam, she would dress him well, and she would send him off to the mosque so that he prays at the mosque, so that he spends time with the Holy Prophet. And then when he comes back, his mother, Fatema al-Zahra alayhi salam, would always ask him, what did the Holy Prophet say? Tell me. And the historians tell us that he would deliver the sermons of the Holy Prophet, word for word, and in the same manner that the Holy Prophet ﷺ speaks. And she would be extremely happy and extremely impressed with this. And we are told that she told Imam Ali alayhi salam about this. And Imam Ali alayhi salam told her that he wanted to see the words of the Holy Prophet ﷺ spoken by his son in front of him, but she told him he might be too shy. He'll be too embarrassed and intimidated to do it in front of you. So Imam Ali alayhi salam hid himself He concealed himself in the house so Imam Hassan doesn't know. And then when Imam Hassan alayhi salam came, Fatima al-Zahra once again told him, what did the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi say today? This time he could not speak. And she told him, what's the matter? And he told her, it's as though there is someone great watching me. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam came out and hugged him and kissed him. But we see here how Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, the mother, prepares the child, sends him off, and follows up afterwards. It's not left to chance. There's a constant following up. There's a program of education. They want to see to what extent is he learning. Is he missing anything? Is he misunderstanding anything? There's a constant follow-up that we see. In addition to this, if we look at the Holy Prophet ﷺ himself, it's one thing to say that the Holy Prophet has given instructions about tarbiyah, instructions about how people are supposed to raise their children. It's a completely different thing when the Holy Prophet has now a child of his own. And this is in the public eye. Before that, the Holy Prophet ﷺ did have Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, but she was born before in hardship and perhaps not as much scrutiny from society. When Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was born, completely different environment in Medina and Munawwara, and everybody wants to see how the Holy Prophet is going to raise this child. And the Holy Prophet really considered him his son, and he would refer to Imam Hassan alayhi salam as his son. And Imam Ali alayhi salam, the biological father of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, would also refer to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam as the sons of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So when we keep this in mind, and we look at how the Holy Prophet is raising Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, there's a lot of points we can talk about, but very quickly. The first thing to keep in mind is that the Holy Prophet, we said in al-Madinah al-Munawwara, the Holy Prophet is a leader. He's a political leader, a religious leader, a military leader. He's an extremely busy man, a big family, taking care of all of the community, constantly at war, constantly under threats. And yet we see the amount of time and energy he dedicates to raising Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Every moment he can, he spends it with them. We're told that when the companions would come to visit the Holy Prophet late at night, the Holy Prophet would open the door, and he's usually covered in his abaya, in his blanket, external garment, as though he's hiding something. And they would ask him, what are you hiding? And he would open it, and they would see how Imam al-Hasan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam are stuck to his body. They're sleeping on him. Every moment that the Holy Prophet had to spend with his grandchildren, he did spend it with them. We are told that the Holy Prophet gave great respect and great love and great care to children in general, and specifically to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. We're told that the Holy Prophet would say salam to every child that he saw. We're told that the Holy Prophet, when he would speak to a child, he would go down to their level. He doesn't stand and speak. He bows down to the level of a child to speak to them. And you can now study in psychology why they do this. They do this in kindergartens and nurseries, so that the child doesn't feel intimidated by someone who is bigger and embarrassed from them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught these manners to the Holy Prophet, and we see the great care that he takes 14 centuries ago in the manner in which he was dealing with the children. And beyond this, we have the narrations that tell us, for instance, and there's a lot to talk about here, but very quickly, the narrations that tell us that the Holy Prophet would be seen on all four, on his hands and knees, with Imam al-Hasan or Imam al-Hasan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam riding on his back. And we have multiple narrations from this. We have some, if you go through the books of history, some that talk about when the companions would see the Holy Prophet, they would say, Ni'mal Matiyah, or they would say, Ni'mal Rakb, or they would say, Ni'mal Jamal. This tells you what? This tells you that the Holy Prophet did this a lot. He didn't do this once. And I would ask you, how many of us would be willing to do this? How many of us would be willing to go on all four and have our grandchildren on our back in front of the companions. And we said the Holy Prophet is the leader of the Islamic world, a political leader in a ruthless world, a religious leader. And this is the care that he takes, the amount of time that he takes, the dedication that he puts into raising his children. And of course, the answer of the Holy Prophet, when they would tell him this, they would tell them, they would speak to them, either Imam al-Hasan, we have narrations only Imam al-Hasan on the back of the Holy Prophet, or both Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, and the companions would tell the Holy Prophet, when they would see them, they would tell them, what an amazing ride, what a great ride you have. نعم الجمل ونعم المطية ونعم الركب. And the Holy Prophet would answer, ونعم الراكبان أو نعم الراكب هو أو هما. And we have, as we said, multiple narrations of this. And so, if you want to look at it from the purely normal human perspective, you see how the Holy Prophet is never allowing any degradation or belittling of the child. Of course, we're keeping aside the theological, ideological dimension here of Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein being infallible imams, and so on and so forth. And then we also have one point, and then we move to the second angle. The last point I wanted to mention with regards to the upbringing of the Holy Prophet is that the Holy Prophet ﷺ ensured that children are brought up together in the community. If you look at the life of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, you see that they were always in the mosque when the Holy Prophet was there, performing his prayer, reciting his sermons, teaching. This tells you that perhaps in some of our communities, in some of our centers, when you try to seclude the children away, when you try to keep them away from what is really happening, the true event, when they don't get to experience it, when they don't get to learn it directly, they're missing out. The Holy Prophet would not push out Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein when they want to play on him or play with him while he's praying. He would keep them there. And of course, as we said, there's a theological dimension to this. But there's also the human dimension and the psychological dimension. If a child grows up in a center where they feel at home, where they feel welcome, where they feel at ease, then they feel that they belong here. This is part of who they are. And this stays with them and it molds their personality. We cannot think that there's a time when children need to be shunned and pushed out as though there is a time only for adults. And no, the Holy Prophet made sure that they are living the experience fully, even in the most important of these events. If we talk about the event of al-Mubahala, for instance, of course there is a theological dimension. Of course, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees that his religion is under threat, and the Holy Prophet ﷺ is challenged by the Christians, who tell him basically they're doubting his prophethood, and he tells them, okay, so you pray to God, and I pray to God, that whoever is lying amongst us, may God's curse and punishment befall them. And when the Holy Prophet came, he didn't take out any of the companions, any of the scholars, any of the reciters, he took out his family members. And there's a number of dimensions that we can look at this from, one of them being the direct involvement. The monks, the great monk among the Christians, when he saw this, he told his folks, his Christian folks, he told them, I swear to you that I'm seeing faces that if they were to ask God to move mountains for them, they would move the mountains. And if you think about it, which faces did they see? We're told that the Holy Prophet came carrying Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, holding the hand of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, walking beside him, and then behind them was Fatema alayhi salam, and behind them was Imam Ali alayhi salam. I would maybe argue that the faces they first saw were the face of the Holy Prophet and Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, before they saw Fatema and Imam Ali alayhi salam. So this is in a way telling us to what extent the Holy Prophet has children participating in everything. If you go in the treaties that the Holy Prophet signed with the Christians and with the Arab tribes, the alliances he created, at a very young age, when the Holy Prophet passed away, Imam al-Hasan was 7 or 8 years old. 2-3 years before that, the Holy Prophet was writing treaties, peace treaties, alliances with tribes. If you read the treaties, you have the name of Imam al-Hasan as a signatory. One of the people, the Holy Prophet, says this is sent from Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the Prophet of God, and these are the people who are witnessing this. And one of the names is Imam al-Hasan. How old is Imam al-Hasan here? And yet the Holy Prophet has him sign the document as though you would think you have a full testimony from someone who is mature and old enough to understand what is going on. In the event of Ghadi al-Khum, when Imam Ali alayhi salam was appointed as Imam and Khalifa to the Holy Prophet, the reports tell us that beside Imam Ali in the tent were Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Husayn. And once again, how old are they? They're children. And yet you see that clearly the Holy Prophet, if he would have said, this is not a place for children, have the children leave, then they wouldn't be there. This means that the Holy Prophet has made it a place for the children to be living the full experience, political, religious, spiritual, whatever it may be. And this is part of the upbringing. This is a molding of the personality, of the psychology of the child as they grow up. And this is something that we see very clearly in the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. Let me go a little bit faster here for the three other angles. The second angle, so this is the first angle. If you want to study the life of Imam al-Hasan, to focus on the family relations and the principles of Islamic upbringing, tarbiyah Islamiyya. The second component has to do with studying the life, the history of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. The life of Imam al-Hasan was extremely complicated and extremely eventful. So as we said, he is born and the Holy Prophet ﷺ takes him as though he is his own son, and he lives with the Holy Prophet during that time as much as he could. Of course, with Fatema and Imam Ali alayhi salam being his parents, and they all spent time together until the Holy Prophet passes away near 11. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam is about 7 or 8 years old. And then he witnesses the events of the passing away of the Holy Prophet. He witnesses how the Khilafah was usurped and taken away from his father. As he had seen, and as we said, he was at Ghadi al-Khum and he understands fully all of those events. He saw what happened to his mother, Fatema and the injustices that happened to her. All of this within a span of 2 to 3 months after the passing away of the Holy Prophet. And then Abu Bakr becomes the first Khalifa. He is there until about year 13. And then Umar ibn al-Khattab becomes the second Khalifa for about 10 years. And then Uthman ibn Affan becomes the third Khalifa for about 12 years. So until year 35, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam is spending his time with his father, Imam Ali alayhi salam, as a loyal supporter, as a loyal son, and as someone who is obedient to his Imam, Imam Ali alayhi salam. And we're going to come back to a couple of points related to this a little bit later when we talk about the distortions. And then after this, Imam Ali alayhi salam becomes the Khalifa in year 35. And he is martyred in year 40. And during that time, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam participates in the 3 battles of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and playing an important role in the battle of the camel, Ma'arakat al-Jamal, sometimes referred to as al-Basra. He plays a very important role. He plays another very important role in Safin, the second battle of Imam Ali alayhi salam with Muawiyah, which lasted almost 18 months, if not more. And during that battle, we see again and again, if you read that battle in detail, you see how Imam Ali alayhi salam is constantly trying to keep back, to hold back Imam al-Hasan and Imam Husayn from fighting, constantly saying we need to preserve them, we need to protect them. These are the children, the sons of the Holy Prophet. They must be safeguarded and protected. My duty is to safeguard them in this world, not to allow them to fight as they might die. But still, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam played a very important role in those 2 battles, and he also participated in the last of the battles of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Naharawan, which was the battle against the Khawarij. And then Imam Ali alayhi salam is martyred in Shahr Ramadan, as we shall see in a few days, inshallah. And then Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam becomes the Imam. From that year until he is poisoned about 10 or 11 years later. So that's the time of the Imam of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, during which he is an Imam. And during that time, initially, the people come and they give their allegiance to him as a Khalifa, but then they turn against him and they fall for the trickery of Muawiyah, and the Imam loses all his supporters, and so he forces Muawiyah into a peace treaty. And then he goes back. At that time, the Imam was in Kufa. He goes back to the city of Medina. And at the very end of his life, finally, his wife, Ja'da bint al-Ash'ab, she poisoned him. During that 10-year gap, we are told, if you go back in history, the Imam was perhaps poisoned, perhaps around 10 times during that 10-year period. But he wouldn't die. And so that poison was a special poison that was used for the Imam. Muawiyah sent a special message to the wife of the Imam, and he bribed her. He told her, I will give you a gift of 100,000 dirham, and I will allow you to marry my son Yazid if you can poison and kill al-Hasan, because he's trying to get rid of Imam al-Hasan, because there's in the peace treaty, Imam al-Hasan had forced Muawiyah to agree that Imam al-Hasan would become the Khalifa as soon as Muawiyah dies, and Muawiyah is trying to make sure that it would be his son Yazid who would be the one who's taking over. In any case, so as we continue with this, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam during that time is the Imam until he is martyred and he passes away alayhi salam. The third angle, after looking at the family ties and upbringing and looking at history, the third angle is all the distortions. If anyone wants to study the life of Imam al-Hasan, looking specifically at the distortions, the fabrications, the lies, the defamation that were introduced into Islamic history against Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And we don't have time to see why Imam al-Hasan specifically was so attacked. During the time of Imam al-Hasan, it was Bani Umayyah, the specialists of fabrication, who began with the distortions against Imam al-Hasan. After Bani Umayyah left and the Abbasids, al-Abbas took over the Khilafah, they introduced new lies and new distortions against Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, even more than Bani Umayyah. And this might be surprising, but in short, while Bani Umayyah, it's clear that they had a war with Imam al-Hasan and a war with Bani Hashim, why would Bani Abbas create all these distortions against Imam al-Hasan? In short, it was because they were at war with the descendants of Imam al-Hasan, who were initially together with the Abbasids to overthrow Bani Umayyah. And as soon as Bani Abbas overthrew Bani Umayyah, they turned against al-Hasaniyin and they started exterminating them. And as part of this, they tried to show that their lineage coming from Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, Imam al-Hasan is not special. Imam al-Hasan has all these problems and all these issues that we're going to see in a moment. And the last source of distortions started in the 1800s, and it has continued until today with the Orientalists, with the non-Muslims, the Christian missionaries who started looking into Islam and studying Islam, and they have their own enmity and hatred against this religion and against the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and they introduced new types of distortions against Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. So by the time you read books and you hear lectures, unfortunately, even from the school of Ahlul Bayt, you see a lot of the distortions that were mentioned by Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas and the Orientalists. They've crept into even the books and the speeches of followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. We are told, for instance, that Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was a man who was in conflict with Imam Ali alayhi salam. He was in conflict because of his personality with Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. That he was a man who loved luxuries and comforts, and that he loved marrying women and divorcing them right away. Ridiculous, silly myths created about Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, that he would have married 70 or 90 or 250 or 300 or more women during that time. Of course, this does not match in any way, shape, or form the history and what we know about the character of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And it does not, the math does not make sense. The people who narrate this are known liars and so on and so forth. But these have crept into our history. And then in addition to all of this, we also have the big lie by Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas that Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was unfit to rule. He was not a good leader as a military leader, and he was not a good leader as a political leader. And that's how Muawiyah tricked him into a peace treaty. And of course, this is another huge distortion, and anyone who says this does not understand that it was Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam who forced Muawiyah into a peace treaty. And then Muawiyah regretted And he spent the rest of the time trying to get out of that peace treaty. And everything that he would do would show that he's the one breaking the oath, and he's the one who's only after the rule. And he could not even claim to be following Islamic values afterwards. And then there's the big component that, as I said, has crept into even Shia literature, and big Shia scholars and speakers sometimes talk about this. They say that Imam al-Hasan, and sometimes they also add Imam al-Hussein, they would have participated in the futuhat, the conquests. And of course, the topic of the futuhat, the Islamic conquest that took place in early Islam, is a topic of its own that inshallah we'll talk about another day. But these were not sanctioned, they were not approved by Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. We cannot consider these conquests to be Islamic, to be Islamically valid. They had other motivations. They had worldly motivations and political motivations behind them. So to say that Imam al-Hasan would have participated in these conquests, Ibn Khaldun and others, they make up these stories. They simply added, without any reference, the name of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein as participants in the conquest, for instance, of Ifriqiya, which is northwest Africa, in year 26 Hijri, during the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan, or in year 30, they would have participated in Tabaristan, in northern Persia, near the Caspian Sea. When we are told this, it does not match anything that we know about history. If they are against the Khilafah of Uthman, and they think that their father is the legitimate Khalifa, they would not be participating in these conquests. This is in short, and these distortions have unfortunately made it, as we said, even in our talkers and speakers when they talk about the life of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein. The Imams did not participate and were not present in these so-called futuhat. And then finally, the last component that I wanted to talk about very quickly is the spiritual rank, the divine rank of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam as being the fourth angle. Who was Imam al-Hasan? If we stop being so distracted by the politics and the day-to-day events, who was Imam al-Hasan as a divine guide? Who is this man, who is this creature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent to guide us? Who is he? If we put aside the politics, from the name of the Imam onwards, we have someone who is extraordinary. We have someone who is heavenly and saintly. And by the way, even the name of Imam Hasan alayhi salam falls in the distortions. There's a distortion created saying that Imam Ali wanted to call him Harb. But then the Holy Prophet told him that's not a good name for him. Another creation to degrade both Imam Ali alayhi salam, to show him that he's of a violent nature who loves war, and to degrade Imam Hasan alayhi salam and take away his merit, where it is unanimously said in the books of Hadith that when he was born, Fatema al-Zahra wrapped him in a yellow sheet, gave him to Imam Ali, and she told him, "What are you going to name your son?" And he said, "I will not name him before the Holy Prophet." And he brought him to the Messenger of Allah, and he told him, "What shall we name him?" And he said, "I was not going to name him before you, O Prophet." And the Prophet says, "And I will not name him before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala names him." And so Jibreel alayhi salam comes down with a name for this newborn child. And he tells him that Ali is to you as Harun was to Musa. And therefore, his son is going to be carrying the same name. And the first son of Harun alayhi salam was Shubba, therefore he shall be called Shubba. And the Holy Prophet said, "But my tongue is Arabic. I will not call him Shubba because Shubba is not an Arabic word." He told him, therefore, call him al-Hasan. And so he called him, and historians tell us that he was the first man to be called al-Hasan. No one before him had been called al-Hasan. And even his name, some of our scholars have said, subhanAllah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls him al-Hasan as though Allah knew how many distortions and how much his enemies would try to tarnish his reputation. So he called him, Allah sent his name from heaven to call him al-Hasan. So that if ever there is any doubt, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considers this man the personification of beauty and the personification of goodness, as is the translation of these words. And then we know that Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, sometimes, unfortunately, even us, we claim to be followers of the Imam, but we fail to understand his greatness. as great as Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was, when both of them were alive, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was loyal and obedient to his Imam, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And that is sufficient to understand the rank of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. If we look at the Holy Quran, when we talk, as we said, about the event of Mubahala, chapter 3, verse 61, if we look at the story of Surah al-Dahr, Surah al-Insan, where Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam is included in one of the most beautiful descriptions given in the Holy Quran about who are the true abrar, referred to in the Quran, in the abrar yashrabuna, who are the truly pious and virtuous, that are referred to from verses 5 to 22, chapter 76. And this is what the Quran says. And if we look at what the Holy Prophet says about Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, when he says, for instance, that Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Husayn are two Imams, whether they rise or they do not rise, whether they are at peace or not. And we have the narrations from the Holy Prophet ﷺ, the famous narration of al-Kisa, at the end of which the verse of Ayat al-Tathir was revealed, 33:33. This is where we start. If you put all of this together, the greatness of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam cannot be missed. Unfortunately, oftentimes we get bogged down by the political dimension of the debate, and we lose track of the greatness, the divine greatness of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, about whom the Holy Prophet would say, al-Hasan wal-Husayn, Sayyida shababi ahli al-Jannah, they are the masters of the youth of paradise, and their father is better than they are. وَأَبُوهُمَا خَيْرٌ مِنْهُمَا. Finally, in there, we can also add the characteristics, and there's too many to talk about. One of them is the famous characteristic that Imam Hasan alayhi salam has been known for, which is his generosity. And there are too many stories to tell about Imam Hasan related to this. When people would come asking for money from him, he would not open the door. He would give a bursary or a purse filled with money from behind the door, so that the person doesn't feel embarrassed that the Imam saw their face. And these stories are too many to mention. This is one example. And suffice it to say that no one can match the generosity of Bani Hashim in general, or the generosity of the household of the Holy Prophet in particular. No one would ever doubt that you have the generosity of Imam Ali, the generosity of Imam Hussein, generosity of the Holy Prophet. And yet, in that household, the title of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, in that environment, is the generous one. The one who gives. Kareem Ahl al-Bayt. In that environment. So you can imagine what kind of giving Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam would do that he inherited or he earned himself that name or that nickname. Allow me to conclude, and I've taken too long, allow me to conclude by saying there is a need to study the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam for ourselves, to understand it so that we can apply it. There is a need to study the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam so that we can present it as one more guide and one more divine light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given humanity, and not fall for the distortions that have filled the books and the speeches of history as regards the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us of those who help perhaps one day rebuild the cemetery of Baqi', where Imam al-Hasan's grave is destroyed and in ruins and impossible to visit. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those that the Holy Prophet would talk about when he would look, as we have from Abu Hurairah and others telling us, that every time the Holy Prophet would look at Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, he would pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, Allahumma inni uhibbuh, fa'ahibbah, wa ahibbah man yuhibbah. He would say, O God, O my Lord, I love him. So love him and love anyone who loves him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be of those who truly love Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, not only in emotions and feelings, but in conduct, by aligning ourselves with the teachings, with the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And may God accept our deeds. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.